The mountains of Fort Munro were silent that morning, but something was watching me from the rocks. They said 16 men had vanished in these hills. I didn't believe them until I heard the growl behind me. They said 16 men had vanished in these hills. I didn't believe them until I heard the growl behind me. Hi friends, my name is Sharik and welcome to ManEater Chronicles. Every Wednesday at midnight, I bring you stories that reveal the raw truth of human courage and the dangers lurking in the wild. Tonight's story takes you to the rugged mountains of Fort Munro, where a young hunter came face to face with death, a man-eating lion, and survived by sheer instinct and courage. This is not just a story of hunting, but of fear, bravery, and the thin line between life and death. So get ready, because tonight we step into the shoes of a young boy who stared death in the eye and lived to tell the tale. This incident dates back to the year 1940. At that time, I was barely 18 years old, yet in terms of height, build, and physical appearance, I looked no younger than a man of 24 or 25. Hunting had been my passion since early childhood. This passion was awakened and nurtured by one of our neighbors, a gentleman named Abad Khan Sahib. Every Sunday morning, without fail, he would take his sons, along with me, and head out for hunting. Abad Khan Sahib owned an old double-barrel shotgun made in Dera. He prepared his own cartridges by hand, carefully measuring powder and pellets as though it were a sacred ritual. He was a man of status and comfort, yet in his life there was no occupation more important than hunting. For 6 days a week he would sit at home filling cartridges or preparing sweet flatbreads and special dishes for the coming hunt. Then, with great care and enthusiasm, early on Sunday morning, around 3 o'clock, he would load all of us onto his horse cart and set off towards Dahar, nearly 8 miles away from the city. Abad Khan Sahib was a brave man with a cheerful and lively personality. His style of hunting was unique. He hunted only birds. Quail were his favorite. If quail were not available, he would settle for partridges. His aim was extraordinary. Despite the age of his shotgun, he would easily bring down 15 or 20 birds in a single outing. As soon as he felt that enough game had been taken, he would put the gun back into its case and spend the rest of the time playing, laughing, and enjoying himself with us. It was through his guidance that I first learned how to handle a firearm. By sheer coincidence, or perhaps destiny, on my very first shot, I brought down 3 quail at once. Abad Khan Sahib handed all 3 birds to me with pride, and later, upon returning home, formally congratulated my father, saying, "Your son has done wonders." Summer vacations arrived soon after, and our household became busy with preparations to travel from Dera Ghazi Khan to Fort Munro. In those days, my uncle was serving as SDO in the irrigation department in Dera Ghazi Khan. Every year during the months of May, June, and July, he would move to the hills of Fort Munro to escape the intense heat of the plains. A few miles beyond Dera Ghazi Khan, the rugged chain of the Koh-e-Suleiman begins, and at an elevation of nearly 6,000 feet lies Fort Munro. Its climate is remarkably moderate. When one leaves behind the scorching heat of Dera Ghazi Khan and ascends these mountains, the air turns cool and refreshing. At night, the weather becomes so pleasant that although one can feel a slight chill, it hardly feels necessary to wear warm clothes. This was my second journey to Fort Munro. My uncle was well aware of my passion for hunting, and especially for me, he had purchased a 12-bore double-barrel shotgun. The license was in his name, but most of the time the weapon remained in my use. As soon as we settled into the vehicle for our journey, a servant placed the gun into my hands and set a box of cartridges beneath the seat near my feet. We were 8 traveling together. My uncle and I occupied the front seat. Behind us sat my grandmother, my mother, my grandfather, and our family cook, Imam Baksh. He had served our household since my childhood, and we regarded him no less than a member of the family. We departed from Dera Ghazi Khan at dawn after a light breakfast. The sight of sunrise greeted us at the foothills of the mountains. Before us rose tall, dark peaks, while behind us stretched fertile green fields as far as the eye could see. Clusters of clouds drifted lazily across the sky, and the cold morning breeze brushed gently against our bodies. The pale golden disk of the sun appeared caught between two mountains, as if trapped between massive rock walls. It created a breathtaking scene unlike anything I had ever seen in my life. Imam Baksh opened a thermos and served us tea. As we sipped it slowly, we became completely absorbed in the beauty of the landscape. Somewhere in the distance, near the edge of a field, the sound of cattle bells could be heard. It felt as though the entire universe had begun to move in rhythm. Birds started chirping, the wind seemed to hum a tune, and the leaves of the trees rustled like applause. Just then, a flock of quail flew past with sharp cries. Instinctively, my hunter's hands moved towards the gun, but my uncle firmly stopped me. He strongly opposed shooting birds early in the morning during their first flight. According to him, hunting should always be done after the day has fully broken. He strictly followed this principle himself and never allowed anyone in his presence to fire at birds or animals at such an early hour. The quail passed us overhead, crying and fluttering away, and I could only watch them with longing eyes. Soon after, we resumed our journey, unaware that this peaceful road would soon lead us towards an encounter that would mark my life forever. After leaving behind the peaceful charm of the early morning plains, our vehicle continued its slow ascent toward the mountains of Fort Munro. Within a few miles, the smooth road began to narrow, twisting and bending as it clung to the slopes. The terrain grew harsher, and the vehicle now crawled forward along broken, uneven paths carved out of stone. The sun had risen higher in the sky, shining with full brilliance, and despite the cool wind, its warmth could now be felt clearly on our faces. After traveling some distance, we reached the first checkpoint. A few soldiers stood there as usual. Seeing our vehicle approach, they raised their hands and signaled us to stop. My uncle brought the car to a halt. The soldiers appeared to recognize him. One of them saluted smartly, while an officer stepped forward and shook hands with my uncle. We all stepped out of the vehicle. The officer informed us that about a furlong ahead, a landslide had occurred on the mountain road. During the previous night, massive boulders had fallen onto the road, completely blocking the passage. Laborers were trying to clear the rocks, but there was no chance that the road would be opened before noon. Hearing this, my uncle glanced toward me with a knowing expression. We then entered the small checkpoint building and sat down on the wooden chairs inside. While my uncle engaged the officer in conversation, my restlessness began to grow. The mountains, the silence, and the scent of damp earth stirred something deep within me. Slinging my shotgun over my shoulder and slipping a few cartridges into my pocket, I quietly stepped outside and walked toward the area where the laborers were working. Several laborers were gathered there, shouting loudly as they struggled together to push enormous stones down into the valley below. They used thick iron rods to pry the boulders loose inch by inch. When a stone finally gave way and rolled with thunderous force, they erupted in cheers, wiped the sweat from their brows, and immediately set to work on the next obstacle with renewed energy. I stood there silently for a few moments, watching their efforts. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable call of a partridge echoing from the mountainside. The sound instantly sharpened my senses. Without alerting anyone, I began to move quietly in the direction of the call, climbing upward with careful, measured steps. The ground beneath the rocks was damp, as though heavy rain had fallen there during the night. Landslides in these mountains were common after rainfall, and this was clearly one such case. The route had become extremely dangerous. At times, massive rocks would fall unexpectedly, crushing anything in their path. Many unfortunate travelers had met tragic ends in such accidents, with vehicles smashed or roads completely blocked, leaving passengers stranded for hours or even days. At night, the danger increased manifold. Wild predators from the surrounding forests would descend into the valleys in search of prey. A lone traveler could easily become their victim. Such stories were often whispered among those who traveled these mountain roads, adding to their fearsome reputation. As I climbed higher, I paused and listened carefully. The partridge continued calling, its voice now clearly coming from ahead. Directly in front of me stood a massive vertical rock face. Without crossing it, reaching the other side was impossible. For a brief moment, I considered turning back. Perhaps this was a sign to return. But youth, courage, and the burning desire for the hunt overpowered caution. I slung the gun more securely across my shoulder and began climbing the rock face, gripping narrow ledges and cracks with my hands. Slowly and steadily, I pulled myself upward. The partridge's call rang continuously in my ears, fueling my determination. When I glanced down, a wave of fear passed through my body. The laborers below now appeared tiny, and the road lay dangerously close beneath the slanted rock. It seemed likely that the rock face had shifted slightly due to the night's rain. For the first time, I truly felt the risk I had taken. Just then, the partridge called out again, louder than before. Tightening my grip, I continued climbing. After nearly 20 minutes of intense effort, my hands scraped and my muscles strained, I finally reached the top of the rock. At that very moment, a loud crash echoed from below as another massive boulder was pushed into the valley. The laborers' shouts rang out once more. I turned back and looked down briefly, then lay flat on my stomach to steady myself. Taking cartridges from my pocket, I loaded the shotgun and slowly raised my head to scan the surroundings. Ahead of me were dense bushes of wild berries, thick and tangled. From within them came the persistent calls of partridges. It was clear now that there was not just one bird, but many hidden among the shrubs. I crawled forward slightly, positioning myself carefully. The birds were close, so close that even if they took flight, I could easily bring them down. At that instant, a terrifying sound came from behind me, a deep, threatening growl that froze my blood. I turned my head sharply and looked back. About 10 yards away, on the opposite rock, stood a lion. Its massive body was tense, its eyes locked onto me. Its long tail lashed from side to side like a whip. Powerful muscles rippled beneath its skin as it prepared to leap. Long, sharp claws extended from its paws, and its fangs glistened in the sunlight. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to stop. At that exact moment, a flock of partridges burst out of the bushes with a sudden flutter of wings. The lion's attention shifted briefly toward the movement. That single moment saved my life. Summoning every ounce of courage within me, I spun around, raised the shotgun, and aimed directly at the lion. As it crouched to spring, I pulled the trigger. The moment I pulled the trigger, the mountains themselves seemed to roar. The deafening crack of the shotgun shattered the silence, echoing violently off the rocky walls. For a split second, the world disappeared behind smoke, sound, and fear. Then I saw the lion jerk violently in midair. With a terrifying growl, the beast twisted, its massive body thrown off balance. It somersaulted backward, claws scraping helplessly against the rock. The lion struck the jagged edges of the cliff as it fell, its body colliding with stone again and again, before finally crashing onto the road below with a sickening thud. For a few heartbeats, I could not move. My entire body trembled uncontrollably. The shotgun slipped slightly in my hands as I lay flat against the rock, afraid that even breathing too loudly might invite death back toward me. The smell of gunpowder mixed with the sharp scent of crushed stone and wild shrubs. Below me, chaos erupted. Laborers screamed and scattered in every direction. Some ran blindly toward the valley. Others froze in place, staring in horror at the massive form lying motionless on the road. Shouts rose from all sides, confused, terrified voices calling out warnings and prayers. Amid the noise, I could hear my uncle's voice rising above the others, shouting my name again and again. But my senses were dull, as if cotton had been stuffed into my ears. My heart pounded so violently that it drowned out every other sound. I lay there, pressed against the cold rock, unable to move, unable to think. The realization of what had just happened struck me slowly and brutally. I had faced death at arm's length and survived. Gradually, the strength drained from my limbs. A strange darkness crept into the corners of my vision. The sky above blurred, the mountains spun, and before I could call out, unconsciousness claimed me. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer on the mountain. I found myself lying on a sofa inside the small room at the checkpoint. My head throbbed, and my body felt heavy, as though it belonged to someone else. Sitting on either side of me were my grandmother and grandfather, tears streaming down their faces. My mother sat nearby, sobbing quietly, her hands clasped in prayer. Standing directly in front of me was my uncle, his face pale and tense, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. The moment I stirred, my grandmother rushed forward and began whispering prayers, touching my forehead and cheeks as though to ensure I was truly alive. My grandfather wiped his eyes and thanked God repeatedly. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, and my voice came out as little more than a whisper. Slowly, my memory returned. I attempted to sit up, and only then did I feel the burning pain in my elbows and palms. My skin was scraped and bleeding where it had rubbed against the rough rock. Seeing this, my uncle gently supported me, urging me to rest. But curiosity and a growing sense of dread pulled me forward. "What happened to the lion?" I asked weakly. No one answered immediately. With my uncle's help, I stood up, my legs shaking beneath me. Outside, a large crowd had gathered. As I stepped out into the open, a heavy silence fell over the people. Their eyes were fixed on me, not with admiration, but with stunned disbelief. In the clearing ahead, the lion's body lay stretched out on the ground. Its massive frame was soaked in blood, its once powerful limbs now lifeless. The golden mane was matted and dark, and its glassy eyes stared blankly at the sky. Even in death, the animal radiated an overwhelming presence, as though the mountain itself had fallen silent in respect. The laborers stood around the body, frozen in place. Their faces were pale, their expressions haunted. One by one, they began to speak, their words tumbling out in disbelief. They told us that this lion had been a terror to the entire region. For years, it had ruled the surrounding mountains and valleys like a curse. During the summer months, it would creep silently into the laborers' camps at night, dragging away a man without making a sound. By morning, only bloodstains, torn clothing, and scattered bones would be found in the valley below. No one slept peacefully anymore. Soldiers stationed at the checkpoints had tried repeatedly to hunt the beast, but it was cunning beyond measure. Whenever armed men approached, the lion vanished into the mountains. But when guards relaxed their watch, it returned without warning. By then, nearly 16 men and even a young boy had fallen victim to its hunger. As I listened, a chill ran through me. I realized how close I had come to joining that list of names, another forgotten body in the depths of the valley. The lion that lay before us was not just an animal, it was a man-eater, shaped by blood and habit into a relentless predator. And it had been brought down, not by a seasoned hunter, but by an impulsive young man driven by instinct and chance. The workers looked at me with new eyes now. Some bowed their heads in gratitude, others stared as though unsure whether to fear me or thank me. I felt no pride, only exhaustion, shock, and a deep awareness of how thin the line between life and death truly was. As the sun climbed higher above the mountains, its light fell upon the lifeless lion and the silent crowd. The danger that had haunted these hills for years was finally over. But deep within me, I knew this moment would never leave me. It was the first predator I had ever killed. And with that realization, something inside me changed forever. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, its warmth slowly returned to the mountains of Fort Munro. Yet despite the brightness of the day, a strange heaviness lingered in the air. The crowd remained gathered around the lifeless body of the lion, speaking in hushed voices, as though afraid that loud words might somehow awaken the terror that had ruled these hills for so long. My uncle placed a firm hand on my shoulder and guided me away from the crowd. I could sense that he wanted to protect me, not only from the stares of the people, but also from the weight of what I had just experienced. My grandmother and mother remained close, their faces pale but resolute, thanking God again and again for my survival. The soldiers soon took control of the scene. One of the officers examined the lion carefully and confirmed what the laborers had already told us. This was indeed the man-eater that had haunted the region for years. Marks of old wounds and scars covered its body, signs of past encounters with traps, bullets, and failed hunts. These injuries, the officer explained, were often what turned predators into man-eaters. Once wounded and unable to hunt their natural prey, they learned to target humans instead. Hearing this filled me with conflicting emotions. Part of me felt a quiet relief that such a menace had been stopped. Another part felt an unexpected sorrow, not for the lives it had taken, but for the cruel chain of events that had turned a magnificent creature into a monster feared by all. Word of the lion's death spread quickly through the surrounding areas. Villagers from nearby settlements began to arrive, some walking for miles just to see with their own eyes that the nightmare was truly over. Old men shook their heads in disbelief, women whispered prayers of gratitude, and children stared wide-eyed at the enormous body lying motionless on the ground. Several people approached me, offering thanks and blessings. Some called me brave, others called me lucky, but inside I felt neither. I knew too well how narrowly I had escaped death. Had the partridges not taken flight at that precise moment, had my hands shaken just a little more, the outcome would have been very different. Later that day, arrangements were made to move the lion's body away from the road. The path was finally cleared, and by afternoon, vehicles could once again pass through the mountain route. Life, it seemed, was already returning to normal. But for me, nothing felt the same. That night, after reaching Fort Munro, sleep refused to come easily. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw the lion's glowing stare, its tail lashing through the air, the moment it prepared to leap. I woke repeatedly, my heart racing, my hands clenched as though still gripping the shotgun. In the days that followed, people continued to speak of the incident. Some exaggerated the story, turning it into a legend where I stood fearless against the beast. Others reduced it to mere chance. I listened quietly, rarely correcting anyone. Words felt inadequate to describe what it truly meant to stand face to face with death. This was the first predator I had ever killed. Until that day, hunting was a sport, a tradition, a source of pride. After that encounter, it became something else entirely. I began to understand the gravity of taking a life, even when that life posed a deadly threat.
My uncle, sensing the change in me, spoke to me one evening as we sat watching the sun sink behind the mountains. He reminded me that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. He also warned me never to let pride take root in my heart, for pride had destroyed many hunters before me. Those words stayed with me. In the years that followed, I hunted many animals, but never again did I experience the same reckless confidence of youth. Every time I lifted a gun, I remembered the lion of Fort Munro. I remembered how thin the line was between hunter and hunted. Even today, decades later, the memory remains vivid. The mountains, the landslide, the sudden growl behind me, all of it returns with startling clarity. That day did not merely give me a story to tell, it reshaped my understanding of courage, fate, and responsibility. The people of the region were freed from a terror that had stolen fathers, sons, and brothers in the dead of night. And I, an 18-year-old boy chasing birds on a mountain, was forced to confront mortality in its rawest form. The lion of Fort Munro was a man-eater, yes, but it was also a mirror, reflecting back my own vulnerability. That is why this incident has remained etched into my memory above all others. Not because I killed a man-eater, but because on that day I truly learned what it meant to survive.